And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. All right, as Chris said, time has lost meaning. Things are going both faster and slower than it seems like they ought to. But today was a historic day for a million different reasons. And let's try to make some sense of it together. I want to start tonight with some of what we saw today, with the way I think today went, and what was just this sprawling, gut-wrenching, emotional hearing. After we talk about sort of what I think happened today, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen because of this hearing today, where this is all likely to go. But in terms of what happened today, this is all out of chronological order because I'm just trying to make the most sense of it. But I think when you talk about the impact of what happened today, even without us knowing what this is going to do to the Kavanaugh confirmation, I think you have to start with this. Nobody has ever been confirmed to the federal judiciary in the United States after anything even close to this happened in the U.S. Senate while that nominee was being assessed for the job.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed by vicious and false additional accusations. You have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation. People have been willing to do anything, to make any physical threat against my family, to send any violent email to my wife, to make any kind of allegation against me and against my friends, to blow me up and take me down. You sowed the wind. For decades to come, I fear that the whole country will reap the whirlwind. The behavior of several of the Democratic members of this committee at my hearing a few weeks ago was an embarrassment. But at least it was just a good old-fashioned attempt at borking. Those efforts didn't work. When I did at least okay enough at the hearings that it looked like I might actually get confirmed, a new tactic was needed. Some of you were lying in wait and had it ready. A long series of false last-minute smears designed to scare me and drive me out of the process before any hearing occurred. You've tried hard. You've given it your all. No one can question your effort. But your coordinated and well-funded effort to destroy my good name and destroy my family will not drive me out. This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons.
Revenge on behalf of the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh isn't on the Supreme Court at this point, but he is already a federal appeals court judge. A federal appeals court judge behaving that way, speaking that way in any setting, let alone in the Senate, yelling like this at U.S. senators. Aside from everything else that happened today, this is just unheard of for a sitting jurist.
If you're very confident of your position, and you appear to be, why aren't you also asking the FBI to investigate these claims?
Senator, I'll do whatever the committee wants. I wanted a hearing the day after the allegation came up. I wanted to be here that day. Instead, 10 days passed where all this nonsense is coming out, that I'm in gangs, I'm on boats in Rhode Island, I'm in Colorado, I'm cited all over the place. And these things are printed and run breathlessly by cable news. I wanted a hearing the next day. My family's been destroyed by this, Senator. Destroyed.
And
whoever wants, whatever the committee decides, I'm all in immediately. I'm all in immediately.
No.
I'm here. I wanted to be here. I wanted to be here the next day. It's an outrage that I was not allowed to come and immediately defend my name and say, I didn't do this and give you all this evidence. I'm not even in D.C. on the weekends in the summer of 1982. This happened on a weekday? Well, when I'm not at a Blair High School for a summer league game? I'm not at Tobin's house working out? I'm not at a movie with Suzanne? You know, I wanted to be here right away.
We hear from the witnesses, but the FBI isn't interviewing them and isn't giving us any facts. So all we have.
You're interviewing me.
Say.
You're interviewing me. You're doing it, Senator.
What you're saying, if I understand it, is that the allegations by Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and Ms. Swetnick are wrong.
Yeah, that is emphatically what I'm saying. Emphatically. The Swetnick thing is a joke. That is a farce.
Would you like to say more about it?
No.
Okay. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Mitchell.
Dr. Ford has described you as being intoxicated at a party.
Judge Kavanaugh seemed to be sort of unable to control himself for some of his hearing this afternoon. And you heard the start of the questioning there that came after that interaction with Dianne Feinstein, where he's really screaming at Senator Feinstein and she's not really getting in her questions, and he's interrupting and he's sort of running off on tangents that we don't really know where they're going. And he then seemed to get mixed up or sort of stuck answering questions specifically about drinking. And it was hard to tell watching this part of the hearing, watching him talking about drinking during the hearing, if Judge Kavanaugh was finding those particular questions just too difficult to answer, or if they weren't necessarily hard questions, but he was just finding it too hard to contain himself, finding it so difficult to contain his emotions that he just couldn't get his answers out.
I drank beer with my friends. Almost everyone did. Sometimes I had too many beers. Sometimes others did. I liked beer. I still like beer. We drank beer, my friends and I, the boys and girls. Yes, we drank beer. I liked beer. Still like beer. We drank beer. We liked beer.
Did it relate to alcohol?
I like beer.
You haven't answered that.
I like beer. I don't know if you do.
Okay.
Do you like beer, Senator, or not? What do you like to drink?
Next one is
Senator, what do you like to
Judge.
drink?
What do you consider to be too many beers?
I don't know. Whatever the chart says on your blood alcohol chart.
So drinking came up repeatedly today for a couple of reasons. Number one, because Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's claim that she was sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh when he was 17 is an allegation that she says happened while Kavanaugh, in her words, was stumbling drunk. So that's one reason why drinking has come up around this confirmation. The other reason drinking came up repeatedly today, at this hearing in particular, is because since this sexual assault allegation against him has surfaced, Judge Kavanaugh has claimed, in testimony that has been included in the congressional record and it was therefore subjected to pain of perjury, he has claimed that he has never once in his entire life drunk to excess, to the point where he couldn't remember something that happened while he was drunk. And that has become a source of controversy in his confirmation because it has been contested by Kavanaugh's friends from the time period in question. They say he was known as a heavy drinker, and that's not the end of the world, but if he's lying about that, there's a question of why he's lying about that. The issue of drinking also led to some of the most baffled, disjointed, even strange responses from Brett Kavanaugh today, including him not answering questions from Senator Amy Klobuchar, and him sort of culminating that exchange with a series of aggressive questions to her where he appeared to be insinuating that she had a drinking problem.
Most people have done some drinking in high school and college, and many people even struggle with alcoholism and binge drinking. My own dad struggled with alcoholism most of his life, and he got in trouble for it, and there were consequences. He is still in AA at age 90, and he's sober. And in his words, he was pursued by grace, and that's how he got through this. So in your case, you have said here and other places that you never drank so much that you didn't remember what happened. But yet, we have heard, not under oath, but we have heard your college roommate say that you did drink frequently. These are in news reports, that you would sometimes be belligerent. Another classmate said it's not credible for you to say you didn't have memory lapses. So drinking is one thing.
I actually don't think that's the second quote's correct.
Okay, drinking is one thing, but the concern is about truthfulness. And in your written testimony, you said sometimes you had too many drinks. Was there ever a time when you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened or part of what happened the night before?
No, I remember what happened, and I think you've probably had beers, Senator, and so
you're saying there's never been a case where you drank so much that you didn't remember what happened the night before or part of what happened?
you're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
Okay, thank you.
Judge Kavanaugh actually came back from a break after that moment and apologized for what he had said there to Senator Klobuchar. It's not clear to me why he said it and why he was going there. We'll talk with Senator Klobuchar about that in just a few minutes. If Brett Kavanaugh ends up on the Supreme Court, or if he doesn't and he just goes back to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, not just this sexual assault allegation levied against him during his confirmation process by Christine Blasey Ford, but also this side of Brett Kavanaugh that he showed today in the hearing room. This will now be a part of the history of this nomination and of his role in history and his role as a judge. I mean, even if he stays on the D.C. Appeals Court, but especially if he goes to the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh's behavior today in this public hearing will change the modern perception of the court in an indelible way. It will change the expectations for what judges are supposed to be like. Now, in terms of assessing the sexual assault allegation against Brett Kavanaugh, which was the cause of today's hearing, there was a pretty tight range in terms of the things that were actually fought over in the committee room. One of them that was fought over and over again, and it's still unanswered, is the question of why Republicans and the White House and Judge Kavanaugh now are so insistent that the FBI must not be allowed to reopen their background investigation of Judge Kavanaugh to gather evidence and gather witness statements about these allegations against him that have arisen during the course of his nomination. Republicans today tried a dual track of arguing both that the FBI background check process is no big deal, it wouldn't provide anything helpful anyway, and at the same time, they insisted today that it's very important that this pointless little nothing FBI investigation definitely shouldn't be done in this case, even though this is the way it's always been done for all other nominees. In the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill matter, in the John Tower defense nomination, I mean, whenever there have been late raised allegations in a confirmation process, and this is a nominee for whom there is a background investigation, the background investigation gets reopened. They insist that must not happen here. And newly today, that the FBI investigation is no big deal. It's hard to argue both of those simultaneously. Judge Kavanaugh himself, though, hewed close to those Republican arguments today, to the point of bewilderment from one Democratic senator.
I'm sure that the chairman at that point will understand that that is a reasonable request to finally put to rest these charges if they are false or to prove them if they are not. You spent 2 years in the White House office that approved judicial nominees. You turned to the FBI over and over and over again for their work. Let's bring them in here and now. Turn to Don McGahn and tell him it's time to get this done. An FBI investigation is the only way to answer some of these questions.
Stop the clock. This committee is running this hearing, not the White House, not Don McGahn, not even you as a nominee. We are here today because Dr. Ford asked for an opportunity here.
I welcome whatever the committee wants to do because I'm telling the truth.
I want to know what you want to do.
I'm telling the truth.
I want to know what you want to do, Judge.
I'm innocent. I'm innocent of this charge.
Then you're prepared for an FBI investigation?
They don't reach conclusions. You reach the conclusion,
No,
Senator.
but they do investigate questions.
I'm
And you
innocent.
can't have it both ways, Judge. You can't say here at the beginning,
I wanted the
passion
hearing.
moment,
Look,
I
this
welcome
thing-
any kind of investigation.
This
and
thing was
then
sprung
walk
on
away
me.
from this.
This thing was sprung at the last minute after being held by staff. You know.
Judge?
And I
if
called
there is
for
no
I called for a
truth to-
hearing immediately.
Why would you resist that
Here's
kind
some
of
dots.
investigation? Why would you resist that kind of investigation?
Sir, I wanted the hearing last week.
I'm asking about the FBI investigation.
The committee figures out how to ask the questions. I'll do whatever. I've been on the phone multiple times with committee counsel. I'll talk to.
Judge Kavanaugh, will you support an FBI investigation right now?
I will do whatever the committee wants to.
Personally, do you think that's the best thing for us to do? You won't answer?
You know, look, Senator, I've said I wanted a hearing, and I said I was welcome anything. I'm innocent.
Immediately after that sort of collapse on the issue of why the FBI can't look into this, it was immediately after that that Republicans actually abandoned their whole game plan for how this hearing was going to go today. Yet remember, if you saw anything in the morning session with Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, Republicans sat silently through the entire morning. They ceded all of their time to ask questions to a sex crimes prosecutor they had flown in for this occasion from Arizona. In the afternoon session, Democratic Senator Mazie Hirono actually clarified at the outset with the Republican chairman that, again, like the morning, they would all cede all of their time in the afternoon to that same prosecutor, rather than saying anything themselves to Judge Kavanaugh. Chairman Grassley confirmed that was the plan for the afternoon as well. But after what just happened there with Dick Durbin, after Kavanaugh fell apart under questioning about why there can't be an investigation of these claims against him, Republicans threw that plan out the window, and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham claimed back his time that he had supposedly already given to the professional prosecutor, and he gave a big yelling speech about how this was a disaster, a terrible disaster, and Republican senators must vote for Brett Kavanaugh.
You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Lindsey said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. To my Republican colleagues, if you vote no, you're legitimizing the most despicable thing I have seen in my time in politics. You want this seat? I hope you never get it. I hope you're on the Supreme Court. That's exactly where you should be.
So they break format completely. Republican senators have not spoken all day long. They're having this professional prosecutor doing it instead. But Senator Graham claims time. He's already given up his time. He's granted time from somewhere. And Senator Graham has them change what they're doing. And after that, from Senator Graham, this female prosecutor was hired by the Republican side to do all of their questioning of both witnesses today. She never spoke again. So they used the prosecutor today to ask all of their questions of the alleged victim in this sexual assault case. But they gave up after a couple of minutes with the alleged perpetrator of the sexual assault, and then spent the rest of the day telling him he had nothing to apologize for. They then shut up the female prosecutor for the whole rest of the day, while the Republican male senators all went on, one after the other, to spend the rest of the hearing making speeches on his behalf until the hearing ended. So that was the point. That was the moment at which the Republicans seemed to think that things were going so badly for this nomination, they needed to pull the fire alarm. They needed to do something, and they did. And so the whole rest of the hearing was angry war cry speeches from male Republican senators, interspersed with short stints of Democrats asking Judge Kavanaugh questions and him not answering. And I am sure Republicans liked the feeling of how it ended much more than the way it began. But they head home tonight, or we're told they head into a big Republican senators meeting tonight, with some new big problems when it comes to this nominee. Number one, there is a brand new temperament issue with Judge Kavanaugh that had not previously been an issue for him. him yelling about how this is all revenge on behalf of the Clintons, right? That was him letting the mask slip a little bit about the kind of partisan warrior he was for his whole adult career before getting onto the bench. It's part of why it took them years to confirm him to the bench in the first place, more than 10 years ago. It's why his initial nomination from the George W. Bush administration was so controversial. That element of his resume and his temperament and his partisan nature, that has largely been absent from this debate over his Supreme Court nomination before now. But now that issue will very much be live. And it will be controversial for him for as long as he's a judge, even if he only goes back to his old judgeship and he does not ascend to the Supreme Court. They will also be newly contending with credibility issues for Judge Kavanaugh. And not just on the issues that Democrats had raised during the other parts of his confirmation hearing, where they said he was misleading on substantive matters of law in his record. Newly, because of today, they're going to be dealing with credibility issues around Judge Kavanaugh in the way that tends to most easily stick in the public's mind, which is when you're not credible on stuff that's small. When you say things that are plainly not true, just to make yourself look better or to get out of a jam or to not have to answer a hard question. Not necessarily on the big stuff, but on the small stuff, the small, obvious, disprovable stuff. Judge Kavanaugh today told Senator Sheldon Whitehouse that yes, when he wrote as a teenager about being the president of the Beach Week Ralph Club, yes, that was a reference to throwing up. But then he apparently thought better of it and said the throwing up in question here, the reason he would be barfing at Beach Week, the Ralph Club in question, was probably about his weak stomach because he can't take spicy food. And who cares, right? Unless that's violently at odds with the obvious small truth here. And with common sense. Judge Kavanaugh also explaining today in his opening statement that when he and a bunch of his football buddies all listed themselves throughout their high school yearbook as, quote, alumni of a girl from a nearby school, a girl who they said, if you were late, don't hesitate, call her to get a date. They're all calling themselves alumni of her name. He said today that was a sign of admiration for her, their collective admiration for her, and how much they considered her to be, in his words, one of us. Whether or not his attitude toward women and girls at that time in his life is going to be seen as relevant to the sexual assault allegation from that time that he's now facing, what's more immediately wrong with that today, as he's trying to get onto the Supreme Court, is that that is just an obvious, small, self-serving lie. That's the kind of cowardly lie about an obviously true thing that makes you seem not credible on anything. Sign of admiration, showing her that she was one of, for what it's worth, the woman in question who was the subject of this sneering alumni thing from Kavanaugh and his friends, she didn't take it as a sign of admiration or a sign that all those football players thought that she was one of them. She said this week, quote, "The insinuation is horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue. I pray their daughters are never treated this way." All right, so there's temperament problems. There's small-scale credibility problems, which are sometimes the worst ones. Those are the kinds that tend to stick, right? Once people think you're super comfortable lying about even the small stuff. But then there's the big factual problems that were raised today around this sexual assault allegation. One was the clarification today in Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony about when this allegation was made. Specifically, when she tried to raise the alarm about Brett Kavanaugh and what she says was her experience with him. She says she tried to raise the alarm. And in fact, she showed today, she confirmed the timeline today, that she tried to raise the alarm about this incident before he was named to the Supreme Court. The spark for her to act, the spark for her to notify her member of Congress about what happened between her and Brett Kavanaugh, to try to notify the press, even though she wanted her name left out of it in both instances, the catalyst for her giving this story to Congress to try to let the country know this happened about Brett Kavanaugh, the catalyst was him being named as part of the short list of presidential contenders for the United States Supreme Court.
This changed in early July 2018. I saw press reports stating that Brett Kavanaugh was on the short list of a list of very well qualified Supreme Court nominees. I thought it was my civic duty to relay the information I had about Mr. Kavanaugh's conduct so that those considering his nomination would know about this assault. On July 6th, I had a sense of urgency to relay the information to the Senate and the President as soon as possible before a nominee was selected. I did not know how specifically to do this. I called my congressional representative and let her receptionist know that someone on the President's shortlist had attacked me. I also sent a message to the encrypted Washington Post confidential tip line. I did not use my name, but I provided the names of Brett Kavanaugh and Mark Judge. I stated that Mr. Kavanaugh had assaulted me in the 1980s in Maryland.
If you were watching this in real time today, that may have just seemed like kind of laying this out, what the order here was, right? Super important. This clarification of the timeline, and it was actually borne out by evidence that was put forth today in the hearing, including by this prosecutor who the Republicans hired. This isn't just a detail here. This isn't just like getting the facts down so we can all talk about this. This is actually totally critical. Because Kavanaugh's defense and Republican senators' defense of Kavanaugh today, this angry chest-pounding defense they put on today, is that he and all the Republican senators decided to go with, was about the timing of the allegation.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election.
No, actually. And not just as a point of argument, but as a point of fact. We now know, attested to by both sides, that Christine Blasey Ford came forward about Brett Kavanaugh when she found out that Brett Kavanaugh was on the short list for the call. She made her calls. She started trying to alert the Congress about this alleged assault by Brett Kavanaugh before he was picked for the Supreme Court. She was trying to get them to not pick him for the Supreme Court. If she had been motivated just to stop a Trump Supreme Court nomination, if this was something that she was doing because she was fueled by pent-up anger about President Trump in the 2016 election, if she was just trying to stop a Trump Supreme Court nomination and she was willing to make up a false allegation about the Trump nominee in order to do that, she would have had to wait until a nominee was picked before she came forward with her story about that nominee. She proved today, with evidence cited by the Republicans' hired prosecutor, that she emphatically did not wait to find out who the nominee was for this Supreme Court seat. She jumped in and tried to raise the alarm about Kavanaugh because she had had this experience specifically with Kavanaugh, and she wanted to raise the alarm just in case he might seriously be under consideration. That is a big factual problem for the defense that was raised for Kavanaugh today. Right? They said this was a made-up story they would have used against any nominee. No. She came forward about Brett Kavanaugh before he was the nominee. Had the president picked somebody else off the short list, it's not like her allegation would have morphed to suddenly become about somebody else. Her allegation was about Brett Kavanaugh under the prospect that he might be named. That is a problem for the Kavanaugh defense, that this is all some hit job designed to take out whoever was going to be Trump's nominee. That's a problem. Factual problem. As is the other one I'm going to tell you about next. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.